Welcome to this past paper question from Medicine in Britain. This one is explain one way treatment was similar between the 13th and 16th centuries. As with all of these similar and different questions, these little 4 markers on the medicine paper, we start off by always talking about the first era and give an example, and then we go on to the second era and give an example. In this case, because we're talking about something that's similar, we're going to have to find also a reason to discuss why perhaps that similarity has remained between the eras. Okay, so there's lots we could include in this one because treatment in the 13th century was very similar to the 16th century. So in the 13th century, we have the classic 4 humours methods, which are bloodletting and purging. So we've got cupping, or for bloodletting anyway, we've got cupping and leeches and cutting. For purging, you could talk about the use of a cloister to put herbs up through the anus and into the stomach. You can also talk about vomiting and sweating. You've also got the religious ones that we could use if we wanted. We could talk about religion being the same, how they used prayer and confession and religious donations whenever they got sick to try and get better. We could talk about amulets and charms and spells that people used to keep in the home. Or you can talk about herbs, because herb use was very similar, although this could be a dangerous one because herbs was also a little bit different, because although they continued using herbs, they had new herbs, such as those from the New World, like quinine and tobacco. So perhaps that's not a good one to use. Let's stick with something that definitely stayed the same. In the 16th century, again, we could talk about bloodletting, purging, religion. You can use all of those. But it's worth noting that because you're talking about the similarity, it's worth adding in and maybe a reason why they're still the same, just to be able to explain the reason and the justification for them still carrying on. So what I'd like you to do, guys, is pick one that is the same, talk about the 13th century first, discuss era 1, give an example, but then of course use the same example into era 2, but try and justify why they were still using it, perhaps, which will just make the examiner realize you know why they're still the same. Okay, so pause now and have a go at doing that in 5 minutes. Okay, so what I've done in this one is I've gone with bleeding and purging, the classic treatments from the 4 humours. So I'm going to do the 13th century first, then I'm going to go on to the 16th century. So in the 13th century, there was a heavy reliance on the 4 humours treatments like bleeding, the cutting of the skin, or purging, which was ejecting matter from the anus, to balance the humours in the body, much of which had been carried over since the time of Galen. Cool, I should have picked up half the marks there. Now let's go on to the 16th century. While time moved on into the 16th century, 4 humours treatments were still being used despite new theories having evolved. This was because old attitudes at the time and people having been accustomed to still being purged and bled as a solution to treatment. Therefore, the practice continued. Now that should hopefully justify why the same treatment is still being used in the 16th century, and I've attributed it to old attitudes, and that's the way we've always done it, sort of thing. Hopefully that should get us the 4 marks. We've talked about both examples in both eras, and we've justified why it's still being used. Hopefully that should get us the 4.